The Skinners, they moved far more precisely and with a degree of organization we weren't prepared for.
Some of these things that ambushed you, they were Skinners?
At least one was. Later that same day, I put a 50 cal round through one's skull, and that did the trick just fine.
Billy, you've seen some of them skinless ones here.
Yes, sir. I've seen 3 of them.
What were they doing?
I don't know. They were all spread out. Seemed like they were looking for something.
Yeah, Vance, we're on our way, but we got a tree blocking the road in your direction.
Pike's stone-cold voice flooded the line.
What sort of supplies we looking at?
He's not coming for us. All he wants is the supplies.
No, he brought Lewis and Hogleg, probably others. They ain't just gonna leave us here.
They will if he tells them to, Vance. And you know it.
4 passengers. Make sure he knows one of them's a doctor.
No, Vance, you tell him 5.
Atlas Warrior Web physical augmentation suit. Slip that on and 300 pounds of cargoes feel like a sack of feathers. I don't care why you're pretending to be Vance Walker. My guess is that after the fall, looking like him came in useful.
Maybe before the fall, too. A little.
What's your real name, anyways?
It's Wyatt.
The Dead Earth. Episode 6. Wyatt, 22 days after the Rising.
The Inato mountain retreat looked more like a naval battlefield than a campsite. A hard rain blitzed the trio of cabins and turned the cul-de-sac into a pulpy beach of red Georgia clay. Picnic tables canted in the flooded field like shipwrecks. Trash cans stood like dinghies next to listing charcoal grills. Dozens of unmoving deaders bobbed in puddles like slabs of jettisoned debris, while more risen trickled in from the surrounding forest. Captain John Hawkins picked them off from his sniper's nest in the attic of Cabin 3. On the ground, Billy lay down cover fire as Max and MJ made their way for the rally point in front of Cabin 1. MJ had a machete. Max had a pistol. Both of them were crouched low under the weight of overstuffed sea bags. Wyatt was nearly 10 yards behind them. Rain bounced off the lens of his Atlas augmentation suit, mixed with the sweat on his brow and stung his eyes. With each step, the high-pressure hydraulics zipped and thunked as he trekked through the hungry mud. Inside the makeshift crate strapped to his back, cans jangled against tins that tinked against bottles. It was the jackpot of food and supplies Pike had been hoping for, enough to hold the Atlanta survivors for another 2 weeks.
Atlas battery at 4%.
Yeah, that'll just last long enough to get me to them trucks.
Wyatt kept a sharp eye on MJ as she rounded in front of Cabin 2. A few deaders stumbled toward her, and the freckle-faced girl cut through them with ease. There was only one problem. Before the Rising, MJ had been a wallflower. Now she rucked fearlessly through risen-infested countryside. She wasn't used to being in the lead, and she'd unknowingly left Max behind. The doctor stumbled along at that not-so-safe distance. Her short hair matted to her head, her small frame bent and heaving under the pressure of the pack. In both hands, she clutched Hawkins' old Beretta, which she raised and aimed as she approached one of MJ's kills. It was a female risen, wearing an orange poncho. Most of its upper teeth were missing, along with part of its cheek. There was a gash in his forehead from where MJ had whacked it. Puffing out an anxious breath, Max lowered her pistol and stepped past. A wing of orange flashed. The Risen in the poncho raked a claw across the back of Max's leg, opening up a cut deep enough to expose bone. Max staggered backward, trying to balance. She fired 3 shots wild, twisted, then slammed against the ground. The gun flew out of her hand and plunked into a puddle. At the sound of pistol fire, MJ whipped around and sloshed back through the mud. The Risen in the poncho flipped onto its stomach, tongue wagging against its bottom teeth as it splashed one palm against the slopping ground, then the other, dragging its cracked legs in a slimy trail of dark blood. Max pedaled her heels, trying to scoot away, but there was no traction.
Help her, Wyatt. I don't have a shot, but I can cover you.
I got her.
Wyatt pulled a small axe from his belt and ran toward Max. As he picked up pace, he gripped his shoulder straps and bounced the crate on his back. The actuators on his AUG suit screeched in protest, launched him forward, and he wheeled a few steps to keep from falling. Just as the internal gyroscope snapped him up straight, a bullet whizzed over his shoulder and thumped into the skull of a debtor behind him.
Atlas battery at 3%.
Wyatt, go!
Wyatt raced towards Max, just as the Risen in the poncho opened a mangled maw and chomped down on the tip of her boot. Max stomped it in the face, once, twice. Bone cracked. A bulbous stream of black pus leaked from its shattered eye socket and dripped onto its teeth. Max wiggled her shoulders to get free of the sea bag. The Risen in the poncho snarled and crept up over her knees, her stomach. With only one strap loose, Max pressed back as far as the sea bag would allow, and as the Risen hovered over her chest, she jammed the heel of her hands into its shoulder, holding it at bay. A blob of the black pus oozed from its smashed socket and dripped into her mouth. Suddenly, the debtor paused and cocked its head like a bird. Its remaining eye cleared, as if in recognition. The moment passed. Its eye clouded again, and the debtor spread its jaw wide, preparing to bite. MJ appeared behind it. She yanked it back by the hood and drove her machete into the top of its head. The Risen twisted violently in her grasp, swiping and spitting and screeching, and MJ shimmied the blade from its head, reared back, and chopped again. The debtor went limp, and MJ let it drop. With veteran calm, she planted her foot between its shoulders, wrenched the blade loose, then with both hands, brought the machete down again, this time against the base of its skull. The Risen twitched, and the blood that leaked over the poncho went black, then red.
Your girl's faster than she looks.
Smarter, too.
What?
Nothing. Talking to Hawk.
Can he see the trucks yet?
They'll be as close as they can get in about 30
He
seconds.
says yeah. Max, you okay?
Max nodded, breathless and stunned. MJ offered her a hand up, and she took it, then winced in pain as she tried to put her weight on her injured ankle. MJ hooked the doctor's arm over her shoulder, while Wyatt spun and sunk his axe into the forehead of an advancing Risen. As it crumpled to the ground, another pair of debtors appeared behind it. They fell in quick succession, one to a bullet from Hawkins' 50 cal, the other to a point-blank shot from Billy's youth rifle.
You're welcome.
Seemingly unfazed by the close call, the kid slung the rifle over his shoulder and picked up the anti-personnel mine he dropped to take the shot. It was the same one Hawkins had prepared earlier that morning as a key component of their escape.
Wyatt, here comes the cavalry.
2 brawny pickups erupted from the side of the mountain, double sets of floodlights bouncing over the camp. Water spewed from beneath the rear dualies like busted sprinklers. At the mouth of the cul-de-sac, the first truck made a sharp and reckless U-turn that tossed up a brown fan of water. The second truck followed suit, only with less flair. One after the other, they skidded their tailgates up to the sturdy ground near cabin 1.
Vance! Screw the plan! If you and Billy come with us now...
Not gonna take that chance. Truck gets stuck with this many debtors on our tail, we're done for.
But...
MJ, you gotta go.
Fine, but...
Now!
Wyatt, 40 Tommies in sight. Damn near 200 more pushing in from the north.
Billy!
Yes, sir?
Get that thing exactly like Hawk said. Go!
Billy tucked the mine beneath his arm and bolted toward the horde. He floated above the mud, dodging corpses, leaping over puddles and branches and bits of trash blown from the cans. The rifle in the sniper's nest rat-tatted, and the risen around him dropped one after the other in a quick, steady rhythm. Wyatt started again toward cabin 1, toward the trucks, his sights glued to the kid as he delved deeper into the thickening dead. There was a barrage of gunfire, and the ground beside Wyatt suddenly erupted. He crouched, and a risen full of smoking holes crumpled backwards. When the shooting stopped, he glanced toward the source. It was Pike, Lewis, and Hogleg, plus a line of men and women from the camp he knew by face alone. Hogleg let out a whoop. Lewis gave him a sturdy nod, but Pike just stared, as if silently willing him forward.
Atlas battery at 2%.
Wyatt sprung up. Ahead of him, MJ limped along, nearly dragging Max, who was plastered weakly against her side. They were almost to the trucks. He followed their path exactly, stepping where they stepped, avoiding the slurpy pools of rain in an effort to preserve power. When he reached a more solid patch of land in front of cabin 2, he stopped and looked over his shoulder again, surveying the center of the cul-de-sac. Billy was still running. Sure of himself, the kid ducked and weaved with grace through a small group of risen, bounded up and over a picnic table, then took a running leap off the edge. His legs pedaled in the air, and when he landed, it was crouched like a superhero at the center of a massive splash. Then he sprang up and spiked the mine into the mud. With a cocky grin, Billy glanced up at the sniper's nest and shrugged.
Jesus, this kid.
That's good, Billy. Now get your odd parts back over here.
Those Tommies headed for the truck are about to have the worst kind of day. Remember, there's gonna be a shitload of smoke.
Billy, big bang, lots of smoke. You keep running right towards me.
Blown it in 3, 2,
Come on, kid.
1.
A spray of steel tore through the risen converging on the trucks as clouds of dense gray smoke billowed out over the cul-de-sac. Chunks of flesh and dirt dropped from the sky, and Billy crouched down and wrapped his arms over his head. A dense wave of smoke raced up behind him, and a second later, he was engulfed. Wyatt took a few steps towards him. Even in the downpour, the air reeked of metal and singed skin. He heard a groan, and from the smoke stumbled a decomposing park ranger studded with patches of moss. One arm was gone, and a tuft of hair stood on end beside a cavernous hole in his head. The park ranger lunged. Wyatt sidestepped and let it fall face first in the mud.
Billy!
Okay.
Then come on and keep low.
A scattering of gray silhouettes ambled in the smoke. The blast reduced their moaning to low and gravelly chokes, but there was an underlying pattern, and to Wyatt, it sounded as if they were trying to communicate. Before the thought could simmer, 2 more figures emerged from the haze. Though hunched, they stood straighter than the others, and they moved with steady poetry, the kind of awareness Wyatt had never seen before.
Billy, move it, kid!
As suddenly as they appeared, they disappeared into the smoke. Wyatt remembered the story that Max and Hawk had told them earlier and imagined the Risen converging on Billy. Dread and urgency welled in the pit of his stomach.
Hawk, I need you, man!
Got moving in the smoke, but no shot.
I'm going in.
What? You keep up in that mud and that suit's gonna power down before.
I know.
I can't cover you in there.
No!
Kids gone, Vance. Get those supplies to the truck now.
They're heading northeast from your position. Wyatt, if the Skinners get in the...
Atlas battery at 1%.
Help me!
Wyatt glanced toward the trucks. Pike was jabbing a finger at him, gums flapping hard. Though his words were lost beneath the pelt of rain, the message was loud and clear. Bring me those goddamn supplies. All he wanted was the crate on Wyatt's back. He didn't care about the kid. In all of the chaos, a quiet war waged inside of Wyatt, between the man he'd been and the man he'd since become. The old him was terrified. He knew that if a debtor grabbed hold, all he could hope was that they tore him apart quickly. On the other hand, no one would fault him for abandoning Billy, because no one would know his real reason for leaving was to save himself. The problem was, he had spent a month now in Vance Walker's shoes, a hero's shoes, and there was a part of Wyatt that really liked the way those shoes fit. In the end, it was a choice between common sense and principle. And common sense was never one of his strong suits. He took a few steps towards the truck. Pike's shoulders deflated in relief. Then, Wyatt unclasped the ratchet straps. The crate slid off of his back and burst against the ground. As Wyatt bolted into the smoke, the collected cans, bottles, and boxes sank into the mud.
I'm coming, kid.
Without the crate weighing him down, Wyatt was lightning on his feet, driven by the dying battery in the AUG suit. But he was blind as he was fast. His eyes, already stinging from sweat, felt parched as the world around him descended into a gritty blur of particles and ash. This deep in the smoke, he could no longer see the shadowy forms of the 2 bleeders. He could barely see the axe in his own hand.
Hawk! You got eyes on him yet?
Not yet, but you're moving in the right direction. The smoke's thinning out quick with all this wind and rain. You'll be on him in a few seconds.
Wyatt kept moving. A lumbering shape erupted from the haze beside him, snarling as it groped his shoulder. Wyatt sidestepped quickly, knocking it loose, then swung his axe in a deep uppercut. The blade caught beneath its jaw, and the debtor dropped to its knees. Wyatt jiggled the axe loose, kicked it sideways, then slammed his foot down on the side of the Risen's neck. Its spine snapped like a twig.
A few more seconds.
Billy, keep talking.
There was no response. Wyatt crouched down and stepped forward, his axe ready in his right hand, his left hand splayed out ahead of him. As Hawk promised, the smoke began to clear, and so did Wyatt's vision. A couple yards away, the forms of two bleeders once again took shape. One of them was wearing a mechanic's uniform and held the kid by the loop on his backpack. The other was wearing an expensive-looking Speedo, 2 sizes too small, and was clutching the kid around the ankle. Between them, Billy dangled like a soggy rag doll. Neither of the bleeders acknowledged Wyatt, and it wasn't because of his ninja-like stealth. The pistons and actuators in the AUG suit buzzed and thumped. There was no chance of a sneak attack, and even less chance Wyatt had gone completely unnoticed, which meant the bleeders were purposely ignoring him. Either he registered as a non-threat, or they were too preoccupied with their current objective to pay him any attention.
Your mistake, shitheads.
Wyatt hurled his axe. The weapon whirled end over end, then planted deep in the Speedo bleeder's skull. It let go of Billy, stumbled sideways in a slow-motion dance before toppling into the underbrush. As if nothing had happened, the mechanic bleeder continued its slow stalk toward the forest, dragging Billy behind. The kid's eyes fluttered open. He realized where he was, and with a panicked whimper, he kicked his heels and clawed at the grip on his pack. Wyatt made a break for the mechanic. Billy twisted in its grasp, contorting at the waist with the boneless flexibility of a cat. As he grabbed for his rifle, he laid fingers on the stock, jerked in an awkward, painful arch, then nosed the barrel up and pulled the trigger. The shot entered between the bleeder's shoulder blades, traveled along its spine, up through its neck, and lodged in its brain. The mechanic paused, swayed, then collapsed. As Billy untangled himself from the mechanic's limbs, Wyatt yanked his axe out of Speedo Bleeder, then chopped it for good measure at the base of the skull. He did the same to the mechanic. Then he smiled with relief and offered the kid a hand up. Billy took it, eyes wide with appreciation. Once he was on his feet, he swiped his muddy palms against his muddier jeans and glanced down at the mechanic with disgust. The smoke had cleared, leaving behind only fading wisps. Wyatt squinted at the forest and saw an army of Risen swarming restlessly in the trees. From the center of the commotion emerged a Skinner, her naked body slick and gleaming beneath the gelatinous shell of blood-tinted membrane. She stood motionless for a few seconds, as if devising her next move. Then, without so much as a twitch in command, the Risen surged out of the trees behind her.
Hawk, got Billy, but there's more deaders moving in and Skinner just inside the tree line.
Yep, I see it. Hello, sweetheart.
The first shot tore open the Skinner's abdomen. The second sliced through her neck. And the third shot landed dead center of her eyes, leaving nothing above the shoulders but a jagged stump of spine. The Skinner's body buckled, and the forest suddenly echoed with a booming, unified screech. A sound raw and primordial. The Risen pouring in from the trees froze in place, then started to jerk and jiggle as if they were being electrocuted. If MJ was right, and the Risen had the ability to rewire their brains around traumatic injuries, then this, Wyatt thought, was a mass reprogramming. As the Risen continued to spasm, Wyatt pointed his axe toward the trucks. Billy's eyes followed the direction of the blade, He nodded once, and they started to run.
What the hell was that noise?
My money's on the other Skinners. They're probably linked, too.
Think you killed him?
Doubt it, Wyatt. They're coming, too. Angle right and stay between those picnic tables. I'll keep a clear path to the trucks.
I need to go back for the supplies.
Negative. Your top dog sent a few guys after him. They didn't make it. All that's left is some wet crackers and too many Tommies to deal with.
Vance, you need to look.
Billy jogged to a stop and pointed at cabin 3. Behind it, the Risen were swarming. Half of their ranks cut toward the trucks. The other half converged on Hawkins with a clear sense of purpose.
Jesus, Hawk, you definitely got their attention.
I see them, and I'll roll out the welcome mat for those bastards when the time's right. For now, let's focus on getting you home.
Atlas battery at 0%.
This suit's running on fumes.
Then you two better quit yapping and get going. I'll cover you.
Billy, we're gonna make a break for them trucks. You ready?
Vance, I was born ready.
Good. Now go!
The command was sharp as a starting pistol. With everything left in the tank, they bolted toward the trucks, their footsteps splashing in sync. But after planting the mine and dodging through a smoke maze of half-exploded Risen, Billy lost steam and slowed. Without breaking stride, Wyatt snatched the kid up by the scruff of his jacket and placed him on his shoulders. He heard Billy hiss a yes in approval, felt him brace against the suit, and as Wyatt leaned forward in a last-ditch sprint toward the trucks, Billy aimed his rifle and opened fire on the closest Risen.
Atlas power failure imminent.
Come on, you son of a bitch. Don't you quit now.
In the near distance, where Hawkins' bullets failed to reach, an army of Risen closed in on the Atlanta survivors. With the exit nearly choked and the supplies lost, the battle was over. Through scattered gunfire, the survivors on the front line glanced to Pike, who was standing in the back of a pickup. Without looking at his people, he made a finger gun and gestured for them to retreat. All but a few piled into the second truck and barreled off down the mountain road. Lewis slid into the driver's seat of the remaining truck. Hogleg looked ready to break ranks, to throw himself headfirst into the fight, but he checked himself and took shotgun beside Lewis. Pike stayed fixed in the bed, holding a pistol in one hand, the other resting on the roof. Still as stone, he surveyed the battlefield. Rain poured down his face in trails. Not far from his feet, MJ struggled to load Max into the bed, and Pike ignored her.
Lewis! Time to go!
No, we have to wait.
I said go!
The truck didn't budge. Pike banged on the roof 3 more times. When that order was met with stunned silence, he holstered his pistol, jumped sideways over the bed wall, threw open the driver's door, and shoved Lewis further into the cab. As MJ and Max scrambled into the back of the pickup, Pike jammed in behind the wheel, and without closing the door, he slammed the truck into gear and fishtailed toward the road.
Atlas Warrior Web physical augmentation suit powering down. Goodbye, Captain Hawkins.
The battery pack around Wyatt's waist buzzed in a rhythmic countdown. For the first time since strapping on the AUG suit, he began to feel the burden of the metal rods, the heft of the straps and their clunky sensors, the resistance of the dying actuators as they whined like a bag of cats. Worse, he felt Billy bearing down on his shoulders, pointy elbows digging into his back, and Wyatt began to bend under his weight. Not far ahead, Max clung desperately to the bed wall as the truck skidded on muddy roads. In defiance of anything resembling sense, MJ threaded the strap of her sea bag through a tie-down bracket, then leaned out over the edge of the tailgate, arm outstretched, fingers reaching.
Come on! Hurry up!
Game over, man. We're not gonna make it.
Like hell we're not.
Vance! Jump!
The battery pack made a sad, burring noise, and Wyatt took a final, leaping lunge. Billy flew up over his shoulders and landed with a clattering thud beside Max. Wyatt hit his sternum on the edge of the tailgate, knocking the wind out of him. He gaped breathlessly. His feet dragged against the road, and his body started to slide away. MJ snagged the AUG suit braces across his back. Max rolled sideways and latched onto his forearm. And together, they hauled Wyatt to safety.
Billy.
Still in one piece.
MJ.
I'm okay. We're all okay.
The truck bounced violently over the mountain road, and the smell of earth and toxic mulch was replaced with the equally sickening odor of diesel. Wyatt rolled onto his back and blinked against the thinning rain. His ears were ringing from the shots Billy took over his shoulder. MJ exchanged a few words with the kid, but the sound was muffled. Max asked Billy a question about Hawk. There was no answer. Wyatt rolled his head to face them. Max was lying to his right, her shoulders propped up against the cab. MJ was on the other side of her, sitting on her heels, doing her best to balance while she wrapped Max's wounded leg. Billy was near the tailgate, gazing soberly at the shrinking outline of cabin 3. Wyatt stood up on an elbow and watched the controlled bursts of rifle fire still flashing from the attic window. The flashing stopped, and a few seconds later, the explosion blew out the boarded-up doors and windows of the bottom floor. Splinters and glass hailed down over what was left of the porch as flame licked the empty frames, devouring the exits. The truck canted violently around a steep turn, and cabin 3 disappeared behind a dense ridge of pine. Wyatt's heart sank. Despite all odds, he deep down expected a happy ending.
I'm still here. Just saying hello to my unwanted house guests. Now I need you to give that earpiece to the dog.
Yeah.
Wyatt, before I go, you keep an eye out for her.
Yeah. I will.
Gritting his teeth, he pulled the mic from his ear and handed it to Max. Wyatt tried not to watch her, the way her face twisted in helplessness as she yanked the mic from his hand. MJ noticed it too, and she paused in the process of wrapping the gash on Max's leg, trying to choose between privacy and medical necessity. In the end, she decided her work was too serious to abandon, and she scooted sideways, facing away from Max to give her what little space the truck bed allowed.
What's going on?
Adult stuff.
You know I'm not a kid.
Yeah. Billy, I know you're not a kid. But trust me on this. There's some stuff ain't none of us ever old enough to understand.
Billy looked ready to debate the issue, and Wyatt glared at him so severely that the boy clamped closed his mouth and stared at his feet. Then as Max and Hawkins whispered their last goodbyes, Wyatt glanced over his shoulder at the 3 figures in the cab. Pike and Lewis were in the middle of a heated argument, and though Wyatt couldn't hear what they were saying, it was easy enough to guess. Pike was angry about losing the supplies, felt he'd been tricked into coming all the way out to the camp, and Lewis, ever the master at diffusing tension, was beating him over the head with reason. Hogleg remained silent, staring straight ahead, a thick crease in his leathery brow. Wyatt had seen the man drenched in gore and buried up to his collarbone and risen. But this was the first time he'd ever seen him concerned.
You... No, Hawk, stop! I don't need you to...
The sound of the blast rolled down the mountain like an avalanche. Plumes of black smoke poured into the sky, lit from beneath by a hellish crown of fire, massive enough to raise the entire camp. Wyatt felt the weight of loss clump in his throat as he glanced at Max. She was shivering violently, a mixture of grief and shock, and her wide eyes focused dully on the inferno, as if trying to decide what was real.
Max.
No, MJ, don't. Please, just...
Wyatt had known Hawk less than a day, and yet grieved for him the way he would a brother. It was true about the bonds of war. Crisis was communion. Now all he could think about was trading places with John Hawkins, of being holed up with MJ while nursing a mortal wound. She'd already saved him once, but it was before he had a chance to lie to her about being Vance Walker. What happened when she found out the truth? When the trust between them was compromised? MJ frowned at him in concern, and Wyatt realized he was staring at her. He shook his head to let her know it was nothing, then scrubbed a palm over his face to rally what was left of his focus. Then he checked the situation in the cab. Hogleg's brow was still furrowed, and Lewis, done arguing, pinched his lips in anger and watched the road. Pike was the center of a hurricane, gray and calm, but radiating an electric chill that promised devastation. Epilogue.
Subsided or blown over. The following steps will ensure that your home will...
Nothing yet?
No, I don't think it's time. I was just hoping he'd come on early since we're almost there. Did I wake you?
No, can't sleep. You ever gonna understand how people could doze off riding?
Is that easier than dozing off driving?
It is for me. Which is why you're the one behind the wheel.
You sure it's the car ride? I mean, after the past couple of days, there must be a lot on your mind.
Sure. Like dinner. I'm hoping folks with that many apples got a few cobblers lying around.
Isn't cobbler more a dessert?
MJ, call it whatever you want, as long as it don't stop me from putting it in my face.
She snorted a small laugh. The sound of it made Wyatt smirk in that wicked way he'd perfected years before the real Vance Walker was selling singles to love-sick teens. It felt strange for some reason, but familiar. That was when he realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd smiled and really meant it. He glanced over at MJ, one eye screwed up against the glare of the low-hanging sun. Her hair was streaked with copper and gold. her freckles muted beneath ruddy cheeks and a deepening tan. Her eyes were focused too intensely on the road, and though her grip on the steering wheel was loose, her shoulders were tense enough to touch her ears. After a moment lost in thought, she wet her lips and shoved her glasses up on the bridge of her nose.
Does it seem weird to you, the way Cliff's helping everyone?
Hadn't struck me as so. Why are you asking?
I don't know. It's just... this guy... what do we really know about him? You just spent the last few days convincing most our camp to pack up and head north to some orchard in Ellijay, all on his say-so. How do we know it's safe?
Safe or not, the camp was out of food, and them forests got more risen than squirrels in them now. We stayed, we died. Besides, it's a calculated risk. Louis said he heard the Cherokee Cliff broadcast long before we run into him at the radio tower.
Yeah, but after the fall. Louis heard the first broadcast after all this stuff started.
So what are you saying? Cherokee Cliff's trying to trick us? Using shortwave radio to herd us all up and do what? Rob us of a whole lot of nothing? Look, just because Pike tried to screw us over don't mean the rest of the world's gone sour. There's still plenty of good folk out there that are...
Wyatt, it's got nothing to do with that. I'm just...
Yee-haw, survivors! It's another bright and beautiful day here in La Casa de Cherokee. A balmy 72 degrees, but the sun, she is a-shining, and the bugs, they are a-chirping. And frankly, kiddos, there ain't no better day to be alive. Speaking of being alive, here's the latest from...
Wyatt turned off the radio. His lips pinched into a thin line as he stared at the dials. A deep cut of worry formed between his brows. He wanted to look at her again, but couldn't quite bring himself to do it.
What did you just call me?
Wyatt? Vance, I'm sorry.
I thought it might be you out in the hall that night.
I wasn't trying to snoop. I was bringing you something to eat, but then I heard you and Hawkins talking about Max, and I didn't want to interrupt because after the scene they made downstairs, it was... I was curious about them. About their relationship. But I swear on my little brothers, I wasn't trying to spy on you.
I know you weren't.
Are you mad?
I've been lying to you this whole time. And you're asking me if I'm mad.
Well, yeah. I get why you do it. Play the fame card. People get comfortable with you so fast because, in a way, it's like they already know you. And it's already saved us a bunch of times, and it'll probably save us a bunch more before it finally doesn't. Plus, I'm pretty sure it's the reason the majority of the camp sided with you over Pike.
Yeah, might have been. None of them were real keen on the idea that I was willing to let him starve to save a few more hungry mouths. I guess if the shoe were on the other foot, I wouldn't have been real keen on it either.
That's the thing about it all, Wyatt. I think you would have been keen on it. I know, no matter who it was who saved Max and Billy, you would have understood perfectly. And that's why I plan to keep this all to myself.
He glanced up sharply and stared at MJ, momentarily speechless. His eyes were lit with a broad range of emotions, starting with fear and shame and disappointment, and ending with all-out gratitude.
Having a good reason for lying doesn't make it right.
Maybe. But it doesn't make it wrong either.
You're not listening. I'm telling you, I can't...
am listening. But more importantly, I'm seeing. Pike, he's the kind of guy that wouldn't think twice about leaving people to die, just because he doesn't get what he wants. And you're the guy that's gonna do the right thing. Even at a cost, knowing full well that there's always a way to make up the difference. If you tell them your secret now, you'll lose their faith. Then Pike wins.
Well, so be it. At least then I can get some damn sleep.
You'll sleep knowing you let a murderer keep control of this group? Over Max and Billy? Over us? Look, Wyatt, the bottom line is, we're all making moral compromises to survive. But you don't compromise where it matters. That's what the group needs. That's what this whole world needs.
If I'm what the world needs, then we are definitely doomed.
Could you maybe just take the compliment?
Compliment. Sounds to me like a whole lot of pressure.
You're lucky this pile of crap is too old for electric locks, because I'd really like to push you out of the car right now.
Oh, Jesus, you would not be the first woman to try. Hey, slow down. This is the turn.
MJ eased off the gas, and the vintage gremlin slowed to a crawl. The caravan behind them followed suit, except for a pickup coated with red mud. It whipped out from behind an old school bus and kicked up a cloud of dust as it rode the shoulder of the 2-lane highway up to the front of the line. It nosed in beside the gremlin. The driver's side window eked down. From behind the steering wheel, Pike nodded at Wyatt. This time, there was no Lewis. Only Hogleg was beside him. Wyatt kept his window up, but nodded in response. Then he looked away, fast enough to betray his disgust. Without waiting for a signal to move, MJ sped up again, and per the agreed-upon plan, maneuvered the little car down a dirt path, leaving the caravan behind. They'd scout out the orchard first, making sure it was everything Cherokee Cliff had promised it would be. And when they were reasonably sure it was on the up and up, they'd go back for their people. Deciduous trees flanked the road of packed dirt. Green leaves, a minority in the clouds of gold and rust. The fields behind them were peppered with wildflowers, and further back, past rolling green hills dotted with farmland and forest, stretched a jagged line of purple mountains. It was chilly, nearing what used to be Halloween, and the orchard would be swimming with apples. Wyatt was so hungry he imagined diving into a pile of them. The road ended at a pair of wooden gates, so tall they were better suited for a medieval castle. Though badly faded, they were painted a burnt red and branded with giant cursive letters that read, "Johnson Family Farm, even better than you remember." The log fence, stretching out from either side of the gates, had been built up with materials likely scavenged from neighboring barns. By all appearances, it was the happiest compound on Earth. MJ stopped the car. Pike and Hogleg pulled up behind them. As they got out, a pair of heads peeked from over top of the gate.
You the folks Cliff sent?
Toby, move. Let me see him.
Christ, Daisy, knock it off.
Mom said I could.
Well, I say you can't. Ow!
Holy crapola. Mister, are you really Vance Walker? Like, for real, for real?
Wyatt could feel MJ watching him, waiting for him to make a call. After a moment of silence, he could feel Pike watching him too, likely wondering why the hell he wasn't responding. The desire to confess, to return to a time where he was just good old Wyatt Benson, was strong. But MJ was right. Fessing up now handed the reins of power back to a man who would have left them to die. Vance tilted his head up to give Daisy and the gathering crowd a better look. Then he spread his arms wide and smiled crooked.
Darling, look at me. I am the real Vance Walker, real as it gets. As much as I don't mind doing a little singing for my supper, You really gonna make me do it out here? Or you gonna open them gates?
Darkness can have a beauty all of its very own. Rise above it all. And now I know I've come to be fire and the rain. We remain the same. A vision comes to me with you in mind. Electricity and atrocity. Oh, I'm not whole. Somehow the story seems to cling. Third of all the kings, things remain the same. I broke a box of mother's pearls, cast before the swine, lost to space and time. With colored lips the jade, as you began to fade, and with such magnitude, misunderstood. Oh, I'm not whole. The A bashful brother of the rhyme sent ahead to shine, called to say it's fine. All of the times I slept away, love and its decay, nothing left to say. When darkness sings to me a simple melody, a song of gratitude, misunderstood. Oh, I'm not whole. Da 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 da.